Virgia Brewer. To meet her today, you'd have no idea that she's a survivor of decades of abuse and trauma, beginning as a sexually exploited child, exploited by family members no less. Her story illustrates why we can't even pretend to know what justice should look like until we know the backstory of people who get crossways with the law. Her story also illustrates the redemptive power of persistent, unconditional love, which in Virgia's case came in answer to prayer in the form of Sylvester Brewer, now her husband. Hear her story. Listen to her voice. She deserves to be heard, and we need to hear. This is Justice Voices, eye-opening stories and commentary about justice, healing, and safer communities. Welcome, Virgia. We're really happy to have you with us in this program. This is going to be very instructive to the people who listen, and it's going to be sometimes hard to listen. But when we are sitting here right now, we are in a nice home that you have. You're healthy, you're happy. You have a husband who loves you, and he's stuck with you through the hard times and the good. And you two have made it work, your lives individually, but also together, you've made them work. But when you were a child and a young adult, could you ever have imagined that you would be in this circumstance right now?
Never in a million years. First, let me thank you, David, for allowing me this opportunity. But never in a million years would I have thought or believed that I could even have these things. Happiness, a home, someone that loves me for me. None of that ever crossed my mind. Never did I think any of those things was a possibility for someone like me.
Well, we're going to get into that. And what we're going to cover is some ground that involves some serious trauma to you. And we appreciate your courage in being willing to share that, because it's difficult to go back and relive some of these experiences. But you have experienced the trauma of starting at a very early age as a child, being sexually and physically abused and exploited. And you've been exposed to traumatic things that have happened around you. You've ultimately, probably largely as a reaction to that, but also cultural factors in your environment, became involved with alcohol and other drugs and became addicted, seriously addicted. And probably largely because of all of that combined, you ended up having multiple experiences with the criminal justice system, experiencing incarceration. You got out, you've had ups, you've had downs, and you've ended up with a good man in a good marriage, living a good life. And you know, there are a lot of people for whom that message, your story, will give hope. Some people will just learn from it because they've never experienced anything like that. But there are others who are or have. So thank you for sharing your story for the benefit of both of those groups. Let's start with your childhood. Where did you live as a child?
In Chicago, Illinois, on Independence Boulevard, with my mother and my father and his mother. It was a family home, a 3-story family home building. My mother and father lived on the 3rd floor. My father's mother was on the 2nd floor, and an uncle and his family were on the 1st floor.
What neighborhood was that in, for those who are familiar with Chicago?
The west side of Chicago, Roosevelt and Independence.
Tell us what life was like.
Life was a state of constant fear, a state of no esteem, abuses of all kinds of unimaginable abuses. I went through all those type of abuses and traumas from the time I was 7 years old until I was 12 years old. I just existed. I did not have a life. It was riddled with fear, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all of those things at the hand of those who were to care for me, who were to rear me, who were to give me morals. Um, None of that was available to myself.
You mentioned abuse that started, and you described a period of time from age 7 to age 12. What kind of abuse?
It started with the physical abuse, whippings by my father and his mother. Um, One of the scriptures they would quote was from Proverbs, I think 13 and 24, but the one that does not chastise this child doesn't love them. And that was used often to correct us for whatever they thought was a wrong. If that wrong was not cleaning something correctly, if that wrong was not getting the grades they thought that we should get, um, if that wrong was saying something that they thought was inappropriate, we were whipped for it. And when I say we, I mean my brother and myself. And when we received these whoopings, these whippings, beatings, they weren't whipping, they were beatings. It was so abusive that we would have to stay out of school for days to heal before they would let us go back to public school. We were whooped with extension cords, boards, or whatever was handy to them at that time. The worst whoopings were with the extension cords and the studded belts. But there were other instruments that was used to whoop us as well. Um, Along with the physical abuse came the sexual abuse. It started with the touching as early as I can remember, 6 to 7 years old. I was either 6 or 7 when it started. And that was at the hand of my step grandfather. Um, his name was Walter. Um, he was a master manipulator. He would sexually abuse me and tell me not to say anything or things would be done um, to hurt my mother or my brother or myself. And then he turned that around and said if I would do these things, he wouldn't allow me to get the whippings that I was receiving.
So your abuser was able to manipulate you by one, threats, but number two, by also the carrot and the stick. The carrot was he'd say, I'll protect you.
Yes.
So your abuser disguised himself, so to speak, as a protector.
Well, he had me on both ends. It was like, which was the lesser of two evils. And when I weighed it out, now, there was no lesser or greater. It was just all great because it got him what he wanted. And that abuse, the sexual abuse, it robbed me of a girl's childhood innocence, that fairy tale that I thought that I was entitled to. Meeting Mr. Right to sweep me off my feet, that knight in shining armor, and everything was going to be great. He was going to love me, and I was going to love him back, and I was going to have the picket fence, the whole none of that. All of that was taken away from me. All of that. At the point of that, I had no image of what the future should be because that was my reality. So what I thought was to be my life or should have been my life was all just a fairy tale. That was the fairy tale that I could have those things, and I didn't.
When we were talking before we got together today to record this, you talked about seeing child videos, the Disney type videos, the fairy stories. What was your reaction to those?
Lies, lies, all lies, just made up stuff. Or I thought that wasn't for my people. It wasn't for black people. It wasn't for black children. None of that was meant for us.
So your world was your home, and your home was filled with sexual and physical abuse, but it got worse.
Not only sexual and physical abuse, but emotional and mental abuse as well. Yes, every day it got worse. And it never changed. It never changed. Day in, day out. Either I was used as a servant or as a sexual tool for not only my grandfather, but for those that he shared me with. And that's exactly what I mean, those that he shared me with, that he gave me to.
Tell us more about that.
He was a trucker for a beverage company. And he would take me on the truck with him. And what I know now to be as rest stations, he would have some of his acquaintances meet up there, and he would give me, plain and simple, he would give them to me, give me to them. And I had to do what they asked me to do. Or this was the same man that said that he would not let me be whipped, would whip me if I didn't do the things that his friends were asking me to do. And that meant sexual intercourse, oral sex, um, the sex where they would hit me, all of that, those things.
How old were you?
That started at the age of 7
How long did that last?
until the age of 12 when I became pregnant with my eldest son. And the sexual abuse was then exposed at that time publicly. It was known privately, but nothing was done about it. It was ignored.
Where was your mother during all this time?
My mother was there in the home with us, but she also worked. And my mother was also physically abused by my father. There was always a fight. There was always screaming and hollering. Um, she didn't protect me. She couldn't protect herself. She couldn't stop the physical abuse of herself or my brother or myself.
So this was an environment in which your reality as a child was of horrendous levels of abuse and trauma.
All around me, if it wasn't happening to me, it was happening to someone else. If I wasn't being beat, either my brother was being beat or my mother was being beat. And um, the truth of the matter is, it was a respite. It was a break for me when someone else was going through and I wasn't, because I was the main target day in and day out. I was the target of my stepfather, the target of my grandmother, the target of my grandfather. So every day someone was taking turns with me for an abuse. So when someone else, when my mother and my father was fighting, I knew that there was no attention on me. I could rest. My mind was constantly going to the point. It was so traumatic. It was so bad. I had a friend that I went to school with. She stayed down the street from me, and she fell from a third floor window and died. And while I missed her, I thought, wow, she got out of this. Why couldn't it have been me? Then I wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. And it was at that time, at her passing, when I attempted my first suicide. Um, my father, Charles, he had pills. They were called number 3 Tylenols. And I took some of them because I wanted to die. And I was angry because I didn't die. And I was angry with God because he let me stay here. So in my mind, that said that it was okay for me to be going through what I was going through and for the things that were being done to me to continue. That was my first suicide attempt. That was my first outburst of anger with God, with everybody. I labeled everybody then. I hated everybody. No one loved me. No one even cared for me except my brother, because he was going through the same thing, not the sexual abuse to my knowledge, but the physical abuse. So he understood. We were never able to go outside. We didn't have any friends. All we had was servitude. All I had was sexual abuse. All I had was degradation. I was told I was dumb, I was fat, I was ugly, all of those things. That was the norm for me. That was the norm. So those things just covered me like a blanket, and you learn to, just wear them and keep moving. I learned to just wear them and keep moving.
Did you ever talk to your mother about this? Tell her about the sexual abuse?
No, I didn't, because I was told that if I told, she would be killed. And although I felt that she protected me, I still love my mother, and I didn't want, if the minimum protection that she was giving me was taken away, if she was taken away, I would have nothing.
So after age 12, how did things develop then?
After age 12, at the age of 12, I think we may need to back up a little bit, because at the age of 12, I became pregnant with my eldest son. And then I had to have that child. I was further ostracized because I couldn't graduate 8th grade. I could not attend that year of school because I was pregnant. And at that time, that wasn't something that was done. It was more about them protecting their image than anything to do with me. That was very hard, because they tried to get rid of that child, but I was too far along when it became public that I could not have an abortion. But I was constantly beat with that child inside of me, or made to take things to make me, in the hopes that I would miscarry that child, but I didn't. He was born January the 9th, 1978. And my mother had a sister in Mississippi that wanted to raise a child, and I wouldn't let him go because I felt that I had to protect him, because I felt that the same things that were done to me would be done to him. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't trust anybody but my brother. He's the only one that I trusted. Didn't trust my mother. Didn't trust my father. Didn't trust my aunt. Nobody. So I felt that I had to protect that child.
What was his name?
His name was Lionel Antoine Thomas Hawkins. He is now transitioned on. He passed on at the age of 33. But after his birth, again, I need to back up a little bit, because I was pregnant. I was taken out of school, but that story got around to everyone. So the kids would just come by the house. I would see them outside, and I could hear them talking about me. And their parents came down and got them and told them, stay away from that house. Stay away from her. She's a fast, nasty girl. They didn't want their children to be acquainted with me. They didn't want their children to play with me, which is I they weren't playing with me anyway, because I never saw them outside of school, but they didn't even want them to socialize with me inside of school. You're gonna be like her. Don't you ever talk to her. Don't you let her tell you anything. Or you're gonna be just like her, fast like her, loose like her. All of those things. It was very hard. And on the other hand, that made the males, the children, the male kids of my age, want to have sex with me. No other way to put that. They wanted to have their introduction into that world through me. So that was very hard.
One of the things that just screams out at me is you have a 12-year-old girl who's pregnant.
Yeah.
Okay. That just screams of abuse and should have triggered all sorts of support and intervention, the Department of Children and Family Services, all sorts of things. You haven't mentioned any of that. Did any of that happen? Did the school people at school or anywhere else come to investigate what was it that caused a 12-year-old girl under the age of consent to become pregnant?
No, not for that. The Department of Children and Family Services did, once that I remember, come to the home, because as I explained to you before, the beatings that my brother and I took, we would have to stay out of school until we healed. So we missed a lot of days. And for that reason, they came out. And for you to understand this, you also need to know the spiritual side of the I don't know the word to use for this, the persona of the church that was there, which was held in our home on the second floor. Those church people also knew about it. So when the Department of Children and Family Service came out, because I don't know who reported it at the school, but I do know that the school sent them out. They rallied around my grandmother, who was the quote unquote pastor of the church, and my father, her son, and said that those things weren't true. And after that, they left. They didn't even interview myself or my brother to ask us, was those things true?
You were not interviewed yourself?
I myself was never interviewed, but I was there present in the kitchen while they were talking to my parents and my grandparents in the dining room. Right there. They could see me, but they didn't ask me any questions. Was that true or not? But there were church members there that said that that wasn't true. Because we're here 3 times a week for services, and we don't see any of that. None of that ever happened. And that's the way that that went. And when I became pregnant and had to leave school, no one ever showed up. No one ever wondered. No one ever asked me, what happened? How did this happen to you? Never. All I got was, she's dirty. She's nasty. You see what happened if you fast like her? Those type of things. Inside of the house, I was called a slut. And it was not my grandfather's child. It was the boys that I was running around with at school. How could I run around with anyone when I was never allowed out of the house? Except for school and the hours of school. And we had a certain amount of time to get from school to home. And if we didn't make it within that time, if we were late 5 minutes, that was a whooping. So you best believe that I was on time with getting home.
So inside the home, it was covered up.
Mm-hmm.
You were suffering the abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Your mother was probably, from the sounds of things, in denial
Mm-hmm.
and afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And you were afraid and being the victim of horrendous abuse of various kinds. Outside the home, the people who should be seeing all sorts of warning signs apparently were not, other than the physical abuse when you had missed school because of the beatings. But when DCFS came, no one even asked you what had happened. No one asked you when you became pregnant. Who was the father?
No one ever asked that. My grandfather was the father.
Right.
No one ever asked that. No one ever asked myself or my brother anything.
They just assumed and accused you of being, your words, a slut. Their words, a slut.
Mm-hmm.
That it was because of something that you had done and that therefore you had brought on yourself.
That is correct.
How did that make you feel?
That made me feel closed in on all that made me feel helpless. Because they're dangling in front of me what I thought was a little bit of hope that I could be rescued was just snatched away. There was no hope left after that. After they came and didn't help me, I knew that there was not going to be help for me from anyone else. I knew that there wasn't going to be any help for me for the church people because they backed her. Her being my grandmother, the pastor of the church, and her son. There was nothing left for me. There was no place else that I could get hope. My mother did at one point in time ask me, was anything going on? I lied because I feared for her. I feel for her. And then that fear for her was more fear for me because I know if she was taken out of the equation, then there would be no holds barred. There would be, I don't know how the season could be more open on me, but I feared what would come after that if she wasn't there.
And all this before you're even a teenager.
Before I don't even say that I was ever a child, much less a teenager. I was just an entity existing in this world.
And being used and abused.
Being used and abused.
By adults.
By adults.
By
the children of the church. Even they ostracized me. You know, their parents told them not to stay away from me. In church, they couldn't even sit by me. I was what do they call it? I was preached about in church.
Preached about.
Yes, I was the subject of preachings in church. That further proved that if you spare the rod and spoil the child, this will happen. And I remember the one that said this is why they took their kids out of the town and stoned them because of children like her, those type of things.
So in other words, using religion
Oh yeah,
to protect the abusers and justify the abuse and turn it
yes,
onto you
yes,
as a sinner,
yes.
a perversion of religion.
A perversion of religion for their benefit, for them to allow to just, I don't know if they were trying to justify within themselves what they were doing to me, but that's what they did. They used it to justify themselves and to justify them before the eyes of the congregation.
Now, I'm not going to skip ahead to this right now, but for the sake of those listening, you now have learned the truth about God, and you have been rescued from these perversions of teachings about God and the nature of God. But we'll get to that.
That was a long process because I hated God. But as much as I hated him then, that's how much I love him now because I learned the truth later.
That's important for some of the people listening to know.
It is.
And I hope they continue to listen to the rest of your story. So let's move on from this. You were 12, 13 years old. How did your life unfold after that?
At the age of 13, I had a child. At that point in time, my mother finally did leave my father. We moved out of that building to further on the west side on Roosevelt and Carloff. My mother had an apartment there. Now, at this point in time, because she had to work, because she had 2 children and was single, she still had to go out and work. So that made me, again, caretaker and caregiver of my older brother, of the house and the things that needed to be done there. Plus, I had to take care of a child that I did not know how to take care of. I was told just make sure that he's dry and feed him, and I'll do the rest when I get home. Make sure that your brother has something to eat, that you all eat, have something to eat. That was my life again. So again, I'm becoming increasingly angry. But at this time, she wasn't there. So I could go outside with the baby, and that's when I started meeting my peers, another set of peers. And those peers were getting high. They were drinking. But it seemed like they were having fun. Fun was never identified. I never identified what fun was, but they seemed happy. So I wanted to seem happy too. And so I gravitated toward them. And I was gladly accepted what was offered to me from them. What was offered to me from them was more alcohol. And that was when I was first introduced to marijuana and rush, those things.
What's that?
Rush is a substance, it's a liquid substance that you would sniff, and it will give you a high or euphoria for a period of time. The marijuana made me uninhibited. It made me laugh because I was a socially awkward. I did not know how to socialize with people, much less those of my own age. So pretty much wherever you said or whatever you suggested, I was willing to do. I was willing to do if that meant having some fun and some freedom. And I did it. And I enjoyed it. And I sought it more and more and more. That was the beginning of my alcoholism and my addiction.
Well, alcohol in particular is a depressant on the brain, and sometimes it can cause people to, for a period of time when they're under the influence of the alcohol, forget their troubles, become uninhibited and all of that, and it becomes an escape for them. And that in itself, psychologically, is addictive, aside from the chemical properties, the effect of the alcohol in your brain. But you're so young. The effect of alcohol and other drugs on the brain of someone that young is very different than that when later on when 21 years of age or over. That's why the age for drinking is 21, by the way, because alcohol is highly addictive to people before that time. And here you were, 13, 14 years old.
You have to understand too. I became, I started drinking more when I got with those peers, but alcohol was introduced to me through my stepfather. He gave me my first drink, and another scripture. It's good for the stomach. You know, that's the one that they use. But for me, alcohol at that time, it was a pain reliever, and what I mean by that, it made the sexual things, the penetration, the um, the the whippings or whatever you call that when they're having sex with you, that made it less painful. So alcohol to me was a depressant, a pain depressant. And then I was swinging for it all the way to the other end of that when I got with my new friends, and alcohol became a joyful thing. So can you imagine that confusion? And and at that age, from 7 until the age that I was now, 12, 13, it was creating a lot of things for me. Not just the euphoria that I thought, but it was also causing me to be crazy. It was mentally breaking me down. It was causing that part of me that no one saw or thought needed to be addressed, including myself. I was the mental things that it was doing for me. The which was easy because the things that had occurred before that. Again, it was just a continuation of what was going on with me. If you can imagine that, I thought this was the better part. I thought what I went through as a child in the early years was the bad part, but this part was a better part. So I thought that this was the progression of life and how it should go.
Virgia, I can't imagine it. I understand what you're saying, but can I imagine it? No. And there are a lot of people listening who are like me, where I'm sure it's difficult for them to imagine. The problem is that there are people who are listening for whom your story is probably all too real to them. So let's talk about how things unfolded in your life, how they progressed in some ways and regressed in others.
Well, I was introduced to a man that was 16 years my senior, and I had my second child by this man. Um,
How old were you?
I had him. I had my second son. I was pregnant with him at 17 and had him at 18. Um, and this was a married man. Also, I need to say that as well. But he introduced me to things that I had never been introduced before, like going to see a movie, sitting down in a restaurant eating.
You had never been to a movie before that.
No,
You'd never sat down in a restaurant to eat.
no, no. And he introduced me to those things, and I didn't realize that at the time that those were things to get me to do what it was that he wanted. Along with that, there was the abuse of him, because if I didn't do what he wanted me to do, there was the physical abuse there, but also those things that he was doing for me were being taken away as well. Um,
You were being manipulated.
Again, but and it, he was an older man. The men that had caused me all of the abuses in my life were older men, so I thought this is where I was supposed to be, with whom I was supposed to be with. So his wife found out, that relationship was severed. I went back to the things that I knew, the alcohol, the drugs. So now I'm hanging out in the streets, and those things progressed. Didn't have a job, but I still had this kid, and I still had these friends. But now things aren't free anymore. I have to produce the money to get these things. So that's when I started stealing. And that's when my circuit through the judicial system started. Um, All of the things that I have suffered, that I have gone through in the judicial system, was because of my need to have drugs or alcohol or both, and the things that I had to do to obtain those things. And it wasn't that I was forced to do those things. I did those things so that I could be in that state where there was no pressure, there was no pain.
You could escape.
I could escape. But the escape was always temporary. So I had to create it again and again and again. However, by whatever means necessary. If that meant selling my body, that's what I did. If that meant stealing, that's what I did. If that meant selling drugs, that's what I did. And all of those things landed me in jail to the extent that eventually I ended up in prison.
And what did you go to prison for?
I went to prison for delivery of a controlled substance.
How did that come about, that you had moved from being a user to selling?
I sold to use and I used to sold. That's I don't mean to be rude about it, but that's just the simple fact of it. I sold drugs in my body to get drugs, and I was arrested for that.
Yeah, I made a career, as you know, as a federal prosecutor, and much of that was spent investigating and prosecuting large-scale drug trafficking organizations. But at the federal level, we weren't prosecuting people who were at the low end of that line of distribution. We were going after the higher level people. People at the lower end were people who, as you say, whether it be cocaine or methamphetamine, there are people who were distributing so that they get money to buy drugs for themselves. So that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? That
That's exactly what I did.
You were selling to use, and the two of them were highly connected. And the only way to break that cycle, of course, is to do something to reduce that craving, that meant that the brain craving the dopamine that is released from using those types of drugs. Putting you in jail didn't solve that problem, did it?
No, it didn't, because it didn't solve that problem because those issues weren't addressed when I was incarcerated. No one said that. No one did a clinical breakdown of what was happening to me or what had happened to me. No one told me that you think that you were selling drugs and drinking alcohol to support a habit, but you were doing that. No one said you were doing that because of the emotional abuse, the physical abuse, the mental abuse that you have suffered, that you have scarred your brain. None of that was told me.
So this is from my perspective as someone who spent a career in the criminal justice system. This is painful because essentially what happened to you, your experience with the criminal justice system, was, again, people were trying to punish this badness out of you instead of trying to identify what is the cause of all this that is going on in this woman who has suffered. I mean, even asking about your life, having the conversation we're having right now, to be able to understand what brought you to this point. It would have become obvious that sending you to jail or to prison wasn't going to do anything to change your life other than to intervene for a period of time. But it wasn't going to solve the problems. They were still going to be there as soon as you got out.
The problem was never addressed. The only time that I was asked of my life's history was one time for an offense that I had committed, and the court appointed lawyer came to me and asked me about my background, and I told him, And he used that, he took that before the judge to get me probation. And I was given probation, but I said, so I could use this to my advantage. Well, that's good because you guys owe me because y'all never did anything to help me stop the abuse that I was going through. And if y'all say that because I went through this and now you now know it, you're going to let me go, then I should have a couple more turns at this. And that's what I did. So I took that information and I used it when I was incarcerated again. Well, it's because of this, because of the abuse that I suffered. That's why I'm here. That's why I came back. Because that was their favorite quote. We'll see you when you get back. And it was true. I would do something else to end back up in jail. But again, all they said was, I told you would be back. No one said that there's a program of recovery that you might try that may be beneficial to you. And no one ever said the most important things that you have to address those issues that brought you here. Not the usage of the drugs, but why you use, such as because of the abuse that you're not addressing.
And the trauma.
And the trauma. None of that ever came up. And when I was finally introduced to a 12-step program, I didn't address those issues because of the shame, because of the hurt.
We'll get to that here pretty quick. Let me just say, for the benefit of those who are listening, that the episode that will follow this one, I conducted an interview of a judge who spent most of his career as a judge presiding over a problem-solving court, most of which was a drug court that he presided over. And in those type of courts, problem-solving courts, those are courts that focus on people that are high risk of recidivism, meaning coming back, returning, we'll see you later, we'll see you again, and high risk, high need people. You would have fit exactly into those criteria. Had you been in a problem-solving court, it's maybe some things you would have been spared, and maybe others would have been spared some of the consequences that flow from just continuing to pass you through the system. You can pass through a school without ever learning anything and graduate. You can pass through the criminal justice system without ever receiving anything that really helps change the course of your life. But problem-solving courts, I'm just going to, that little quick word, listen to the next episode to find out more about problem-solving courts, which wasn't the experience you had. So
I never knew that such an entity existed.
Well, for the most part, it didn't. It's relatively new that these things are starting to happen, and they aren't the norm, but they are an approach to justice that needs more support because it is resource intensive. But lives change, and you will enjoy listening to Judge Jeff Ford's episode when he talks about that. But let's get back to you.
So I've had 2 more children. I'm living with my mother because their fathers are out of the picture. We moved, my mother and I and the children, we moved from Chicago to a suburb of Illinois, Carroll Stream. But again, because I had not dealt with the issues inside of me, because I still had so much anger and hurt inside of me that was unresolved or even unaddressed, that lifestyle didn't go away. Whenever something didn't go the way that I thought it should, or I had to work for something, and I couldn't handle something, I went to the comfort zone. And the comfort zone for me was alcohol and drugs. So my children were taken from me and put in the custody of my mother. And to that extent, I was like, okay, it's your turn. You raise them, because we didn't talk about the child that my mother and my stepfather had together, but I was over her as well as far as being a caregiver for her. I was like, well, I took care of yours, now you could take care of mine. So with the gloves off and no children, all things just magnified. I was just out there bad. I was just out there bad, and I thought that I was living good, that I was having fun, but I was steady tearing me down and those around me. I never thought about the effect that I would have on the people, that did love me, and the people that did know what I went through and wanted to offer me that support. It was like, nah, it's too late. You don't mean it. No, I'm not trying to hear that. I just want to do me. I just want to have some fun. Reality, no, you keep that over there. That's not what I want. No. And so that's the way that my life went. Again, it was centered around my comfort zone, what was best for me, well, what I thought was best for me. And that's what I did. There was no in between. It was in the morning, getting drunk or high, in the afternoon, dinner, evening, night, the same thing.
Now, Virgia, you're in a very different place today.
Yes.
How did you get from there to where you are today? Tell us about that.
While I was living that life that I was living, my mother became ill. My mother had cancer and some other medical things going on, and she pleaded with me to get myself together to take care of the kids because she didn't think she was going to be around much longer. So I tried to heed that, and I went into a treatment program. Um, but again, it wasn't to better myself inwardly. It was to be able to not drink or drug so that I could take care of my mom and the kids. And it just doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It only worked temporarily. I had sobriety for 5 years, and I thought that I was well. Um, and I thought that I was well because my mother started healing. She started getting well. And I was like, okay, she's better. So now it's time to get back to me and the life that I want to live. And that's what I did. I went back to my alcohol and drugs. And each time I went back, I got further and further away from my family and friends and reality, in and out of institutions. When now I do know about treatment houses. For me, they were just places to go and get some rest, so that I could rest up for the next round. Um, and that was my life for several years. I used alcohol and drugs for better than 25, 30 years. So it took some time. But in the midst of that, I was raped. I was beaten. Um, and then thrown in jail to boot with that. Um, and I was like, there's got to be something better. Um, why? Why do I have to live this life? Why is there nothing better for me? Why can I make the turn? I've heard the stories of other people overcoming this. Why can I do it? Why not is it working for me? And at that point in time was my first point of surrender. That's when I started having the conversation with God. If you did not sanction the things that happened to me and there is a life better for me, do something for me now. Help me to obtain this thing that I keep hearing about that is supposed to be life. Because I don't want to live this way anymore. I was just hurting. It wasn't about me being physically tight. It was about me being emotionally and spiritually bankrupt, morally bankrupt. That pain, I felt that I was just merely existing in life, that I was walking around dead, but I just hadn't laid down yet. And it was at that point in time that I said, I want to live. I don't want to die. I have not have a life. Can I please have a life? And that's when things started getting better for me. That's when I started hearing what people were saying to me about this road of recovery. That's when the system of rehabilitation started to work for me. And I got involved into a 12-step program. That's when my mother passed on, and I met my now husband, um, and he supported me through that. He told me that I was worth loving. He told me that there's a spirit inside of me that's beautiful. He could see it, but I couldn't see it. And I didn't believe him. I looked at my husband as Yeah, I got one. I got one on the line. I just looked at him as a means of benefit to an end. But he loved me in spite of that. He supported me. And even with that being said, and I went back to the alcohol and drugs, he came and got me and said, "This is not the life for you. I really care about you. But if you can't care enough about yourself to add to the love that I have for you, we can't continue this relationship." And I had never had anyone to just love me for me, that wanted nothing out of me but love. He didn't he didn't say, "I'll do this for you if you do that for me." That wasn't a part of it. And I saw that I was about to lose that, and I didn't want to lose that.
What's your husband's name?
Sylvester Brewer.
And Sylvester is sitting there listening to this now. And back then, there was nothing in it for Sylvester
Nothing.
except you.
Why? I don't know. What he saw in me, I don't know. But he hung in there with me until I believed it. Till I believed it. He also told me, though, when I came out of the last treatment center, that you're going to have to get some more help. You can't stay here without getting some more help. And that's when I went into an intensive outpatient system. But he supported me for that. They had the open meetings. He was there at every one of them. He himself was dealing with issues in his life. His wife before me had passed on, and he was trying to raise their children on his own. Two girls, the son was off at college, had established his life. He asked me to help with them. And I had not been there for my children, so I felt this was an opportunity to give back, to help someone else's. Um, and he trusted me with that. And his children didn't like me in the beginning, but we became close. And I didn't know that I was capable of nurturing someone or receiving that, but to receive love back from children blew my mind, because all I knew was the children that were said that told that I was no good, not to be around her. But there were actually little people that wanted to be around me, that needed love from me and accepted it from me. Wow, that just blew my mind. That just opened up my heart, and love grew, and love grew. And from then I wanted to give that to other children, because I had not given it to my children. And my children were estranged from me because of what I had taken them through. And they didn't want to be a part of me, except for my youngest, my daughter. But the boys, that's a hard thing for your sons to see their mother living the way that she was living. So the boys didn't want any part at all of me. But my daughter, my baby, she stuck in there with me and blended with his girls. And wow, it just grew. So I knew that I had something to give. I knew that I could give love. And that's my main focus today, to nurture children, to let them know that to esteem them, to let them know that they're worthy of the best and that they're worthy of love, and to protect them, to educate them on things that aren't good, things that you do not have to accept. That is my main focus. But I want to offer that help to men, women as well as boys, but they're worthy. They're worthy of it. And when they know that they're worthy of it and they receive that love, simultaneously they give it back. And that's how love grows. And that's how the community of support around me grew. God restored all that because I asked him. I didn't think he would do it, but I asked him. God restored my family to me, and he did. And I'm not looking back. I'm moving forward. People started trusting me with their children. That just blew my mind. The ones people didn't want me around their children. That just blows my mind. And I nurtured them. They trusted me to take their children to school. They trusted me with their children after school to make sure that they were fed, to help them with their homework. Wow. To walk into a room and hear someone say, "Miss V, Nana, Grandma." Oh wow, that melts me every time. It melts me every time. And and I have to keep that growing. I have to keep that going. I have to, because they think that I'm helping them, but it's the other way around. They're helping me, and I need that. I need that. I need to have that, and I need to give it back.
Now, as I listen to this, and I think, what is it that made the difference? What was the turning point? You mentioned that you went into an intensive drug treatment program, and I'd like to learn more about the difference between that and what you'd experienced before. But that doesn't seem to be that's not what you're talking about. What a great program you went through. You experienced, first of all, you approached God differently. Instead of with anger, you approached him asking for his help, and love came into your life. And Sylvester, you've talked about Sylvester coming into your life, and then the love of children, which engendered love for children. And love seems to have been the dominant thing you're describing here that changed your life. And this is a remarkable thing. This is a radical change.
Love is the main ingredient that keeps me going now. With God, I didn't approach him a different way. I approached him with all that anger that was inside of me. I'm so angry with you, God. This is your fault. You're supposed to have all power. You're not extending any of it to me, but I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm out of options. If you are who you say you are, if you are different from this God that I've been introduced to, show me. Show me. I'm opening up to you now. I'm surrendering to you.
And he did show you.
And he did show me. He did show up. I've never known a love like it before. Because when things started changing, I knew it was no one but him. I was in so many situations in that lifestyle that I was living that I could have perished, that I could have been sentenced to years, that I could not have been reunited with my children, that I would have never met that man over there that loves me unconditionally, that would have never been of assistance to his mom or his children. That's all because it started with God. When I surrendered to God, then love was introduced. If love was already there, I never saw it. But that's when I began to see.
Now, this is going to embarrass Sylvester here, but it seems to me that when you reached that point in your communication with God, God responded by sending you an angel named Sylvester Brewer.
Yeah.
And that often is the way God works.
It is. I met my husband at a concert, an outdoor concert, and we were out there listening to the music, and I don't know what attracted him to me, but he came over and started listening to the music with me because I'm one of those people that knows the lyrics to all the songs. So I was just singing and dancing, and he came over, wow, you know that, you know that, you know, I remember this when I was growing up, that song, whatever. And so we started talking, and he brought me dinner. And when the concert was over, I thought we were just going to go our separate ways. He said, would you mind taking a ride with me? Mind you, this guy rode up on me on a 10-speed bike. And he said, well, let's go to the beach. He put the bike on the bus. We got on the bus, and we went to the beach, and we talked to the sunrise. You know, it was very intimate. And when I say intimate, he talked to me here. He didn't talk to my body. He talked to me here, to my heart. That was the most beautiful thing that I had experienced with someone of the opposite sex. And he didn't want to let me go. Even after that, he wouldn't let me go. He said, let me take you to breakfast. And we went and had breakfast. And then he asked me for my number. I thought about giving him a wrong number, you know, as was my MO when I didn't want to be bothered with someone, when I couldn't get gain out of someone. That was my MO. But I gave him the right phone number. And he followed up. He called me. And it's been on since then.
Something prompted you to give him the right phone number. And something was prompting him. This is a relationship worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And you both responded to those promptings.
Yes.
And look where you are today.
Yes. In 2007, he asked me for my hand in marriage. And in 2008, before God, our family, and our loved ones, I gave my hand to him in marriage. And we've had our ups and downs, but we're still here.
So 15 years later.
15 years later, we're still here. We're setting the example of what love and work produces. It may sound fairy tale to you, but we've had our issues. Please don't take that out of the equation. We've had our issues, but we have come together to discuss those issues and come to a plan of action to get past those issues. And then there are just times that we agree to disagree. What we have is not worth the disagreement. I love this guy. He's my constant support system.
See, that's commitment in love.
Yes.
It's not a fairy tale. No. It's not, and they lived happily ever after. Because sometimes what comes after is a lot of struggle together. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the struggle is with each other. Mm-hmm. But through the commitment in love, with God's help, I know that sounds to some people, they're saying, oh, that's a fairy tale. No, it's not.
It's not. No, it's not. When I do something or think about something, I examine or I think, how would that make my husband feel? How would that benefit our marriage? How can that make us stronger? It's no longer about me first and nobody second. It's about us and setting an example, being grateful that he was allowed to come into my life. That's what that's about for me. Only when I think about others am I able to give unrestrictedly. And it just, it's like I've put money in the bank and I'm reaping the increase. That's what this guy is for me. That's what my family is for me. That's what this love. Man, I don't know how it could get much better than this. But if it does, God, I'm waiting for it. But I'm happy. I'm not in like with my husband. I'm in love with my husband. I'm in love with my life. I'm in love with my children. I'm in love with the upward mobility that I'm gaining. It's just getting gooder and gooder. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And any obstacles or struggles that come across my path, I learn from them. They're just building blocks now. I'm not defeated. I'm no longer broken. No longer am I broken. And when I run across a piece that I have to address or that I have not addressed from the past, because the past comes up when I see it in someone else, or when I come across an issue and my past makes itself known, I address it either with myself or with my friends from the 12-step programs, but first with my husband. Whatever it is, we get through it together.
Do you still go to meetings?
I do. I still have a sponsor. I still do 12-step work within the program and outside of the program. Those outside of the program don't realize that's what I'm doing. But you can only keep, that's the true saying. They have a lot of cliches, but that is a true one. You can only keep this by giving it away. Because if you don't, you're back to just you. I'm just a pebble. I'm not even a pebble. I'm just a grain of sand on the beach. And that's pretty pathetic. You can't have a beach with just a grain of sand. It takes all of us. I need everybody to be who I am, to share who I am, to help others grow.
Virgie and Sylvester, it is a privilege. It's an honor to meet the two of you. And Virgie, to hear your story, and Sylvester, to hear Virgie talking about you and sharing your part in her life. I can't help but just marvel at how, if we had been having this conversation 16, 17 years ago, you would never have imagined that you would be sharing the things that you just did with me today. And yet here you are. It's real. It's real. And there are people who are listening who can probably identify with where you were, what your life was like when you were just existing. And perhaps listening to this gives them hope, but also gives them a path and a plan forward with what is it that made the difference in your life and that can make the difference in their lives. Thank you.
You're very welcome. My hope is that whomever sees or hear this knows that wherever you are, wherever your struggle is, whatever's going on, if you can just believe that you're worthy of it, that you're worthy of better things, and that you're worthy of life, that state that you're in does not have to be your end. You can grow. Things will get better because they have for me. Please, I hope that this is reaching someone so that they can be a help to someone else, that they may know that is going through this, that they will see that there are options, that there are entities around that are willing to help them. They're there. I didn't know that those things were possible or were available to me because they weren't, but they are now. So please take advantage of those things. You don't have to do this. I thought I had to do everything by myself, but I don't. There are places, there are people that are willing to help you without looking for anything in return but your betterment. I pray that you take advantage of that this story helps you, that this reality helps you, because it's not a story. This was my life. This is my life. And I know that someone has gone through this or is going through this, or know someone that has. Please know that that does not have to be the end of your story. I am grateful to Cabrini, the Cabrini legal system, to Mr. Hanlon and others like you all that have reached out to help me. I never thought that people would care to help, especially the legal system, because they never helped me. But now I'm getting help from all around, especially the legal system. I'm in awe. I am in awe. I can't even find a word to fit it. The amount of help that's available today is there for you to avail, to take advantage of. I don't know what else to say. It's there. Your story, wherever you are now, does not have to be the end of your story. What you put in store, you always have a reserve to take from. And God and my husband and those around me are our reserves. You know, again, you don't have to do this alone. It was very hard for me to share and to realize that I didn't have to do these things alone. And when you're sharing a burden, it is lessened. And I'm very appreciative. I am very appreciative. That's why I need to give back. I have to give back. It's not an option for me. I have to give to those that have sown into me so that they can sow into others, so that there'll be a great harvest. I have to. It's not an option.
All I can say is amen and amen.
Amen.
Virgia's story was eye-opening, wasn't it? No one listening could think or feel the same again about justice or healing for victims of such abuse and trauma as she and others like her have experienced. Her story and those of others shared on this podcast need to be heard by thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands, if we're to achieve our objective of creating a critical mass of public support for meaningful reforms in our criminal justice system. You can help by sharing a link to this and other episodes of Justice Voices on your social media. And if you'd like to contribute needed financial support to this program as a tax-exempt charitable organization, please contact us through our website at justicevoices.org. That's justicevoices, all one word, .org. We need your help. Spread the word. Help us make a difference. This is Justice Voices, eye-opening stories and commentary about justice, healing, and safer communities.